Ah, the open world sandbox. Broad open plains, towering mountains, dense forests, bottomless oceans, endless possibilities. In theory, that is. Open worlds are pretty popular, both with players and developers, because they offer a freedom that serves to enhance the escapism already provided by games, as well as a freedom in the creative process when making them. Put simply, they're just fun. Well, they're intended to be fun, but there's certainly some examples in gaming's past that don't quite hit the mark. Over the last few weeks, I have been sinking a lot of time into a niche little game. You might have heard of it. It's called Elden Ring. As you'll likely know, this is a From Software game. You know, the fellas that make all those hard Dark Souls games all the kids are talking about all the time. Now, those games are definitely known for their very deep world building and lore, but they're all linear and not what I would call an open world. This all changed when Elden Ring released with a fully fleshed out, completely explorable open world for the player to sink their teeth into. It's rich, it's vast, it's fun, and that got me thinking. If a series like Dark Souls, and yes, I know Elden Ring isn't technically a Dark Souls game, but it's close enough. If a series like that can make the leap, should Monster Hunter make the leap as well? Strap in folks, I am Pig Ginge, don't forget to like and subscribe, and today we ask the question, should Monster Hunter go open world? Now, open worlds are not new, not by a long shot, and they have had many iterations over the past couple of decades. Some people's definition of what constitutes a truly open world may vary, but in its most basic form, an open world gives the player a map, a way of traversing said map, and sets them free to explore it how they choose, specifically in one continuous space without separate zones and instances. For the most part. You of course have your objectives scattered throughout the world, but there's no one set way to approach them. Now, before we discuss what an open world Monster Hunter may look and play like, let's first look at what to do and what not to do in an open world and make sure our theoretical Monster Hunter 6 isn't subjected to the same pitfalls that so many before it have fallen into. So, as they've progressed and grown more complex, some might argue, myself included, that a lot of open world games have become largely formulaic and just a little bit stale. The phrase "as wide as an ocean, as deep as a puddle" comes to mind for many modern games that are being released these days, and you may even already be thinking of a few specific franchises that have already reached a peak of staleness. Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Division, Watch Dogs... Hold on. Wait a second. Sure, all of those have a lot of objectives and collectibles, but there's no real depth to it. It's not terribly interesting. They overload the map with objective markers and the whole thing just feels bloated and unappealing. To myself and other like-minded people, anyway. Making open worlds even more unappealing is this copy and paste approach that leads to things getting very old, very fast. Now, I am not a game developer, and I have great respect for those who can put together a functioning game that people enjoy, but there's only so many times I can raid the same enemy outpost when there's 30 of them across the map and they all look identical. There's only so many times I can climb the same watchtower or find the same hidden cache of bullets and guns, just in a different location. Quantity does not mean quality, and a bit of diversity and uniqueness goes a long way. In addition to that, it also feels like there's this weird arms race to innovate and add mechanics and gimmicks to the game, and it just sort of adds to the bloatedness even more. Now, maybe this is a product of the gaming space in general, and not specifically open world games. Maybe it's a product of myself being older and not having the same amount of free time and patience that I once had. But a good example is I, along with a whole lot of other people, recently picked up Dying Light 2 when it dropped in early February. I love the first one, I like a good zombie game, and so it was a no-brainer. I booted it up, ready to get stuck in, and the game proceeded to spend like 3 hours explaining mechanic after mechanic to me. Every time I thought I was free to go for it and explore, there was something else to teach me. The map was overloaded with icons, and I ran into the exact same group of NPCs doing the exact same thing about 5 times in 10 minutes when I was exploring. It was too much. It was content for content's sake, and frankly, I haven't touched the game since. There's beauty in simplicity, you know, or however that saying goes. Open worlds need that spark, that feeling of stepping out into a lived-in world that is innovative and interesting, that you might swing around a corner and find something completely unexpected, or wander into a situation that you are completely in over your head with, and now you have to find a way to get the hell out of there. They need to feel like you as a player are in control of your freedom and that you aren't being railroaded, and they need to reward that exploration and that curiosity in a meaningful way whenever they can. Okay, so enough doom and gloom. Let's get a little more positive and turn our attention to some good aspects of open worlds. Now, obviously I was going to talk about it, so let's just get it out of the way, hey? Let's talk about Hyrule in Breath of the Wild. Now, I'm focusing on the world design itself, nothing more, nothing less, so if you have grievances about Breath of the Wild, feel free to air them in the comments below or somewhere else on the internet. Hyrule is pretty fantastically designed, and many consider it to be revolutionary when it comes to the world design in the future of gaming. There's several reasons for this, but the main one in my mind is the creative process that guided its beginning and continued development. Hyrule was approached with an open-air concept in mind from the very beginning, with the game directors aiming to make the world itself as interesting and unique as possible, almost as if it was its own character. They developed as many ways as possible to have the player interact with the world, be it by hunting animals, or cutting and lighting fire to grass, chopping down trees to make a bridge, or pushing boulders off a cliff to crush a group of enemies. Everything was purposeful, and the physics system that the entire game sits on was crucial to this experience. A particular quote from the game's technical director, Takahiro Dota, really stands out to me. "We just want the process of discovery to be fun." So simple and yet so often missed in open world games that are striving to just be the biggest of the big. You'll also notice that the intro area, the Great Plateau, is near enough to the center of the map, which is also entirely intentional. The intricate details that are scattered across Hyrule are done so in a way that helps the player feel that no matter which way they go, no matter what they want to do, they will find something unique and interesting when they turn just about any corner in the game. Unique structures or locations await them, and quite simply, the world feels lived in, whether it's by the animals, monsters, Hyruleans, or anything in between. Now, I know I've babbled on for a bit, but before we start theory crafting, let me come back to Elden Ring for just a moment, while it's still fresh in my mind, because the jump from Dark Souls or Sekiro or Bloodborne to Elden Ring is going to be significant when we think about the jump from Monster Hunter World to Monster Hunter Open World. There are many praises to be sung about the Souls games, but the most relevant of them now is how tight and deliberate the level design is. Everyone remembers the Undead Burg and Blighttown from Dark Souls 1, or Central Yharnam from Bloodborne, and that's because they're built with such care and intent from the developers that they never really get old, despite how much rage they can cause. So how do you keep that tight-knit design in an open world? Well, quite simply, really. Whilst Elden Ring is indeed an open world game, and a fantastic open world at that, there are constant interactions with smaller legacy dungeons, some of which you will spend hours in that are incredibly reminiscent of the Dark Souls games, with Stormvale Castle being the most obvious example. By doing this, Elden Ring manages to avoid alienating its core fanbase while still opening up so many new avenues for accessibility and for folks to get into the game, as there's a whole lot less of beating your head against a brick wall. The world also serves to complement these sections, and visual storytelling is front and center for most of the time when you are exploring. Now, don't get me wrong, it still has a slew of accessibility issues, but that's a topic for another day. Alright, okay, this video is supposed to be about Monster Hunter, not Breath of the Wild or Elden Ring, so let's refocus. What should Capcom aim to do if they are going to make the change to open world for the Monster Hunter series? I've given examples of what not to do and gushed about good open worlds, but what it comes down to is that the game needs to make sure it still feels like a Monster Hunter game. I don't mean it just has Rathalos in it, I mean it needs to have that Monster Hunter spark that echoes throughout the series and has done so for the better part of 2 decades. With that in mind, some of the core things that need to be considered are that Monster Hunter needs to maintain its identity as an intense, action-focused monster hunting game with a quirky cast of characters that help lighten the tone. It needs to maintain a diversity across an open map that enforces different biomes and hunting grounds, mirroring but elaborating on the existing maps that the franchise has, and it needs to ensure the monsters fit seamlessly into this brand new space. Monster Hunter World has already sort of laid out that groundwork for a change to an open world, and with a subtitle like World, I'm surprised they haven't done it already. It has multiple camps across each map, which can all be fast traveled to at a moment's notice. It has a loose collective map that shows each area in relation to one another, and in-universe explanations that link them, such as the rivers of the ancient forest feeding into the Wildspire Wastes, and the Rotten Vale being beneath the Coral Highlands. It has multiple settlements to visit that have different proximities to each map. There are no loading zones within each map, and thus they are already very open, and it has the option to go out and free hunt without needing objectives. Now, before you blow up the comments, some of these things are not new in World, they've been in the series for a while, but it just seems like World would be the obvious framework for an open world rather than like Monster Hunter Tri. So what are some obvious elements that risk getting lost in the open world? Well, the first one is likely the tight and concise level design of each individual map. You may have a varying opinion on World's maps, but they are all incredibly intricate and link up in some of the most creative ways. The Ancient Forest has entire map sections that aren't even for fighting monsters and are only for traversal and exploration, and that goes for all the other areas as well. I would really hope that an open world would be just as interesting, but that is an element that could be lost. Another would be how the quest system works. Now, whether you consider it or not, when you play Monster Hunter, you accept a quest and you venture out, there is travel time. Your hunter needs to get to where the quest is. But in an open world, I would assume that when accepting them and setting out, you would now have to find your own way there and back, even if that were via fast traveling. This is because a more open world would probably seek to limit sending you around the map and rather leave you to your own devices. On top of that, the way the game handles feints and quest timers would also be a little bit tricky because you're not confined to a certain area. I feel like the obvious ways to combat these aspects are by simply having the option to set up camps wherever the player sees fit and return to your choice of camps if you faint. This way you can learn where monsters frequent and play it accordingly, and it can be an added layer of complexity to the game as a whole. If that weren't to work, it could simply be a range of camps across the landscape that are set and must be discovered first, similar to how the campsites in World and Rise worked. The game could also implement something that I'm just going to call hunting grounds, which could be a more densely populated parts of the map overall that hold intricate areas and more monsters, similar to the legacy dungeons that are found in Elden Ring. Explained by, let's say, an increased richness of nutrients in that area, which kind of mimics what World was going for and how the real world works. With regards to settlements and finding quests, I picture it being something like The Witcher 3. Monster Hunter has already toyed with visiting multiple villages in one game, so there's no reason these couldn't be scattered throughout the land rather than being their own instances chosen in a menu. When in these villages, there could easily be a quest board or maiden, or you could even just get quests from villagers themselves. You know, pretty standard fantasy RPG stuff. The only issue with that little part is that the in-game lore of Monster Hunter, to my memory anyway, is that all quests are run through the guild. So some random farmer can't really get you to just go and kill a Rathalos. You have to run it by the guild first. And that is something that could easily be nitpicked. Certain towns could have certain specialties, like a master smith in a volcanic village or a master herbalist in a forest village, but that does kind of run the risk of becoming a bit too generic, I feel. I also don't think there needs to be certain zones that have certain difficulty settings. It could easily just maintain what World has going for it with dedicated food chains across the map, and it's sort of part of the gameplay that you will avoid the apex monsters or learn very quickly why you should avoid them. On the flip side, what do you gain? Well, I imagine it would only serve to enhance the hunting aspect of Monster Hunter, which is something I personally loved about World. I am an absolute sucker for all that fictional ecology and biological stuff, and so that works just fine for me. Having to actively track a Rathalos through a forest and across a sprawling mountainside, as opposed to through areas 5, 8, 15, and 16 of the Ancient Forest, sounds pretty awesome to me, but might not be everyone's cup of tea. I completely understand that. It will also allow the developers to really sink their teeth in and develop the lore of Monster Hunter in a way that we haven't seen before, which I know would delight many fans as well, myself included. I think it would be perfect for the return of mechanics like underwater exploration and combat, and map traversal via things like palamutes and wirebugs, and it could all blend really well into an open world setting and really give the player the feeling that they can truly go anywhere they want. Development of more permanent key items and gear, like how whetstones, bug nets, and pickaxes all became infinite and always available in World, will really help to solidify this experience as well. Things like a breathing mask to eliminate the need for a breath bar in underwater, or free access to wing drakes to travel the map by air, or even access to, I don't know, climbing gear to help scale sheer cliffs. Things like that really drive the experience home. Ultimately, this series will need to adopt more mechanics that make an open world worth exploring without being a jumbled collectathon mess of crap. Given the way that Monster Hunter works from the aspect of equipment, there is no real loot in the series, so it will need to find some other way to get you interested in exploration. No one wants to find their next weapon in an old chest in Monster Hunter. They want to go out and fight a dragon and make a shirt and sword out of its skin. They want to wear its skull on their head and hunt down its brethren to make an even thicker shirt. The gameplay loop of hunt, craft, repeat needs to remain, otherwise it just isn't Monster Hunter. That segues into how skills should work. Capcom absolutely must not implement a classic RPG system with stats like strength, dexterity, and all that stuff, because that will only serve to genericify the experience even more. Skills and character improvement in Monster Hunter comes from your equipment, and if they take that away in pursuit of generic fantasy, there is going to be some very upset fans. At the end of the day, whilst I think it would be awesome to explore the lore and larger world of Monster Hunter, and I do think that Capcom is sort of gravitating towards Monster Hunter 6 maybe being largely open world, it just feels a bit like the series' essence could be lost in the transition. Monster Hunter works best when its encounters, its monsters, and its areas are tightly designed and thought out, but I would love to be proven wrong. If Capcom approaches it correctly and takes what games have previously done right and done wrong and really strives to craft a rich open world that holds onto Monster Hunter's identity, then I can see it being a roaring success. And frankly, I think Capcom's up to the task. Look at the step up world was so that the series could explode onto the Western market. That was entirely intentional and worked wonders for the company and the series. So let's see it again, Capcom. Give us everything you've got for Monster Hunter 6. Delay it as much as you need to, treat your staff well, and let's see what the future of Monster Hunter really can be. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. What are your thoughts on Monster Hunter going open world? Let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have a friend that would like the video too, why not share it with them as well? If you're interested in my more general thoughts on a range of topics, follow me over on Twitter at PigChinge, but for now, that will just about do it from me. I hope you liked it, have a good one, and I will catch you on the next video. See you later.